I have a problem. Camera batteries everywhere. I need to bring order to the chaos. Today I'm going to make a custom 3D printed battery holder to tidy up my space and make my batteries more easily accessible. Recording videos chews through batteries like scarabs on that guy who fell behind. So I need easy access to my batteries. Each of my batteries have their own case, which is great for protection, not so great for easy access and quickly swapping them out. I have 3 batteries each for my Nikon and my GoPro, so the holder needs to accommodate at least 6 batteries. Let's take some measurements and start roughing things out. We're going to start with the Nikon battery because it's going to be the toughest to measure and model accurately. I typically like to start by sketching whatever I'm going to measure because it forces me to really analyze the intricacies of the shape. As you may have guessed, I'm not a professional artist. In fact, I got kicked out of art class in high school. But this step helps regardless of how it looks. Don't judge me, okay? An example of one of these intricacies is on the front of the battery. It looks like it has 2 curves at first glance, but in reality there's a small flat area at the peak of each curve. Using my calipers, I took measurements of all the flat areas of the battery and figured I would match up the curves in the modeling software. Looking back, I actually wondered if I could have traced this. And the answer is yes, of course I could have. But I find it lacks character compared to the original drawing. When modeling, I tend to rough out a shape and then come back and add measurements to it later. I'm not sure if it's the right method or the best method, but it allows me to move forward with an idea. I know I made the curved straight lines, but stick with me. Now let's start adding in the measurements. If your item is small, it's good to keep it handy while you're modeling so you can double check your measurements. The level of detail I tend to measure in is proportional to the distance I'll have to walk to double check a measurement later. Now that we've got most of the straight features worked out, let's take another look at those curves. I tried to use this handy 3D printed fillet gauge, but when I took those numbers into Fusion, things just weren't adding up. I ended up going back and taking some additional measurements of relative distances between the flat surfaces to further help define the curves. Once I was happy with the shape, I wanted to do a test print without wasting too much filament, so I created an offset which would allow me to then extrude this small area just a few millimeters. Let's save this out as an STL and drop it in our slicer software. In my slicer, I didn't adjust a lot of settings. I had in a 0.8mm nozzle from a previous print, but for this test print, that was fine. I decided to go with a green filament in my final product, so why not do my tests in green too? Maybe the green will make me happy when my first print doesn't fit right. I'm pretty sure it took longer for the printer to heat up and cool down than it did to actually print this, but it never hurts to double check your work. The first print is done and it just doesn't quite fit, so I took note of what needed adjusted. When I got back into Fusion, I needed to add a base because I totally skipped that step earlier. Then I changed the reference for my Nikon battery sketch to be the new base. Now I can make those adjustments to the sketch so that it'll line up better on the next test print. The GoPro battery is pretty straightforward since it's just a simple rectangle. I decided just to give myself a little padding in my measurements when putting them into Fusion rather than being super precise. Because I want these to be easily removable, I don't want to take the holder with me when I go to grab a battery. For now, ignore those couple of extra lines because we'll come back to those. I moved the 2 pockets closer together because I want to do another test print to ensure that the batteries slide easily through. In the slicer, I added some negative volume objects with the goal of reducing the amount I needed to print to the bare minimum. Once I got all those in place, I sent it off to the printer. Again, it's a short print that will hopefully save me from future headaches. The second print was much better and easily slid over the Nikon battery. I went ahead and tested the GoPro battery too because it was there and why not? Everything looks good, so we're going to head back into Fusion for a couple more tweaks. You might be wondering why I drew this extra rectangle. Well, I got the idea from looking at the bottom of my existing covers for my Nikon batteries. The covers have these small supports that stick up, so the battery sits flat in the cover and therefore on the table. That small rectangle in the GoPro sketch was me thinking ahead about adding supports. Now I'll go back and add supports to the sketch of my Nikon battery. One thing to note is that the supports are neither the same size nor the same height because that's the way the battery was designed. With the supports in place, I want to do one more test print. This test print is going to have a solid bottom because I want to test not only the support height, but also their placement. Okay, our final test print is done and things are looking good. So I think we're good to go work on our final layout. I want the taller batteries in the back and the shorter batteries up front. So I'll align the Nikon battery to the top and align the GoPro pocket at the bottom. I'll use the pattern tool to make 3 of each pocket. I decided to add a quick label to the final layout since there was a little space next to the GoPro pockets. Now it's time to slice it and serve it up to the printer. I decided to swap out my nozzle to a 0.4mm nozzle because the lettering in the slicer with the 0.8mm nozzle just didn't look like it was going to come out good. Yes, this will probably easily double my print time, but I think it will produce a much nicer looking finished product. And a few hours later, we have our new battery holder, and it looks great. I'm happy I went with the smaller nozzle diameter to keep the details in the lettering crisp. One thing I noticed is that I'm not sure if the 10mm final height is tall enough since I didn't originally account for adding in the few millimeters of supports or the thickness of the bottom. Let's see how it will look in its new home. I decided to print another version in red for my used batteries, and I did adjust the height from 10mm to 20mm, which seems to be more stable. I think this is going to work out nicely and make my filming process that much more efficient. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments. Well, of course you're going to leave them in the comments. Where else would you put them?